Welcome to the Startup Leader Show, where we learn lessons from leading startup founders and executives. I'm your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Dushyant Sukhija, and he is the Global Partner Managed Services Practices Head for Cisco. Welcome to the show, Dushyant.
Lisa, it's great to be there and great to reconnect with you as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for making time for this. Perhaps you can start by just giving us a little bit of background on yourself and the Cisco Global Partner Managed Services Organization.
Sure. So I've been with Cisco now 3 years, but this is really my second stint. I spent 14 years prior to that and had the opportunity to go and build new businesses on the side with large companies like T Systems, Unify, but also bring back some really valuable experience into the new Cisco. As you may or may not be aware, Cisco has undergone a radical transformation from a focus on hardware to software to a recurring revenue business model. 85 to 90% of our business is sold through partners. And so now, as part of the Global Partner Organization, we have this new infrastructure and operation to help guide partners across the globe to take their business managed to a recurring revenue model. And so that's what I'm focused on right now.
Oh my gosh, that's really exciting. So, what an amazing background you have. And, I really we talk to a lot of startup leaders, and I know that we work together at an early stage company, but you've also, like you mentioned, spent a lot of time at Cisco. And so I really want to start our conversation by talking a little bit about entrepreneurship. So, how you've actually driven new ideas and concepts within a large organization like Cisco. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Right. So I think, even though most people think in a large organization you cannot have a startup mentality and entrepreneurship, you actually can. You have to find that for yourself. So I have actually three examples that I'd like to give. One is I mentioned Unify, which was a spin-off of Unified Collaboration from Siemens, and they were looking to sell that operation, and they were selling Unified Collaboration through really hardware and software products. And they brought me in to run global operations, and what I did was basically help transform that entire business to a managed services business, and that allowed us to optimize our cost structure, b bring more recurring revenue in, and c hence make it more profitable and ready for sale, which we did sell to Atlas. The second example I can think of is Chimera. So Chimera was a leader by any stretch of imagination in building flat panel antennas, and they wanted to bring somebody in to commercialize what they had invented. And my job was essentially to think of new business models that will allow us to do that. And we basically switched from selling an antenna to selling data services, and the antenna was a part of that sale. So that's a radical paradigm shift. And the third example is that of Cisco, as I mentioned earlier. We have a tremendous opportunity to take our partners on a journey that we have ourselves embarked on and become very successful with, which is the change and transformation to software and to recurring revenue. So, three examples that I think should illustrate that point.
Right, right. So when you go to embark on some of these entrepreneurship type of initiatives within a large organization, a lot of times the initiatives that you're working on could end up displacing what would be today's major revenue sources. How have you kind of worked through those situations where the new thing may be at odds with the continuing revenue source of today?
Right. So I think there are two aspects to it. Number one, you've got to bring everybody along with you on that ride. And you've got to have a simple, very simple rally call and motive that you get everybody to rally behind: employers, employees, managers, stakeholders, partners, and customers. So, for example, at Cisco now we use Go Managed. As simple as it sounds, we also translate that into business outcomes and what it means for each of our partners, what it means for us as a company, and what it means for our stakeholders. So I think that simplicity is extremely key. The second is to recognize why we are making the shift. And there has to be a compelling business reason, either because the old technology or the old way of doing things has become archaic and not relevant anymore. And whatever that compelling reason is, that has to be put out there, smart, front and center for everybody to pursue and follow. And I
Hmm.
think the third is really the cultural shift. It takes a cultural shift that is deep, that has to get rooted throughout every aspect of the company, from supply chains to the way we sell, the way we compensate, etc. So I think those are the key factors.
Wow. So, how have you, I guess, worked through those changes? So, when you talk about, how you compensate and things like that, what types of changes have you worked on to help drive those new initiatives forward?
Let me take an example. So if I go back to the Unify example where we were moving and transforming from selling products to selling a service, there were two or three things we had to change. One, the way our sellers were compensated. Instead of selling a one time transaction, they now were looking to sell a multi year deal, which
Hmm.
probably was smaller for the first few months and years, but had an annuity revenue associated with it. So, changing the compensation model so they did not feel that they were being disadvantaged was the first change we had to make. Number two, giving them incentives to not do what they were used to doing, but sell the new way of selling our UC products. I
Hmm.
think those are fundamental changes, and you will always see and find that about 80% of your sellers will get it, will follow, and there'll be 10 or 20 who will just not be able to get with the new way of doing business. And it is okay then to replenish your workforce with the people who believe in
Hmm.
how this needs to be done.
Yeah. So you just got done with a very interesting trip. And you did it with some of your Cisco coworkers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. It was, we walked the Camino. The Camino, for those who don't know it, is really the way of St. James in northwestern Spain. And it's essentially pilgrim. It's a pilgrimage, and people, walk about 115 kilometers, or they can ride a bicycle for 700 kilometers. But the intent is to get to the same destination, which is Santiago de Compostela at the end. 435 Cisco people did this together. Everybody challenged themselves because it's not easy to walk 20 to 30 kilometers a day, rain or shine, and everybody got there together. And this was done, by the way, to collect money for cancer research. So we challenged ourselves as one team to do this. And I can tell you, this ended just 2 days ago, and I'm still on that same high because the experience, it was so exhilarating to be able to do it with so many different people with the same mission and goal.
Amazing. How do you think that doing things like that as a team impacts initiatives like this within organizations?
That's a very good question. So we have our marketing teams already wondering how they can message the story, because the power was observed and felt at the very end when we realized that we all had a common mission, something that nobody had actually ever done successfully on their own, with barring a few exceptions. And it was everybody in the same boat, and we had to help one another out to get to the end goal. And I think those three elements just made it so much more exciting and successful.
Yeah, that's amazing. That sounds like so much fun and also very challenging. So that's
Very
really,
challenging,
really
absolutely.
amazing. Great. Well, so looking to the future of managed services, where does Cisco and where do you see things headed in the next 3 to 5 years? I mean, obviously, managed services has been, services that have been available for a long time in the IT market, but how are things changing?
Managed services is clearly going to be the future. Let me give you a couple of examples. If you think of, the taxi auto industry, and you think of the how Uber and the others have just emerged with such a successful business model. It's very simple. They're just utilize. It's better utilization, IT utilization of resources to deliver a service that can be consumed very easily as a service. You look at Apple. Apple's doing the same. Apple has now put a big focus around selling subscriber services. And if you see their financial results, they're constantly focusing on how they're growing it year over year, 30% or more. Cisco's done the same thing. We have moved from a hardware to a software model. We have moved to a recurring revenue model. And now we see the benefits of that. And we actually track and monitor our own progress to see how much of our sales is through software, how much of our sales is now through recurring revenue, and we can also see what the backlog is because the backlog starts to grow and puts you in a much better position for the future rather than go from quarter to quarter hoping you can make your numbers.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll
That
just say one last thing.
predictability, right?
Who have made that change are feeling the benefit in their customer base, the stickiness, the loyalty, and of course, increased revenues. And those that have been slow to do that, they're finding themselves getting away from their customer base. So it's a clear direction for the future.
Wow, that's great. When you think back over your career, what would you say have been some of the most valuable business lessons you've learned over the years?
I think there are three things. One is if you don't disrupt, you will be disrupted. I think John Chambers, our previous CEO, used to always constantly use that phrase, and I think there's so much truth to it because if you are not looking around the bend and assuming that somebody is going to be doing things differently and better than you already, you will be obsoleted before you know it. So I think that's the one single big lesson is to be constantly looking out across bends and trying to figure out what is the next move for yourself as well as for the company.
Hmm. Yeah. When you think back, is there anything that you would do differently if you were to start all over, knowing what you know now?
Yes. Several things. One is honestly not caring about what people think of you or what people think about what you're doing. And the second is related to that is basically doing everything that you love and not doing anything that you don't love to do as a passion. And not forcing yourself into some kind of a schematic that just seems right for the outside world. And it is this passion that I think that can be accelerating in bringing your future to the next step very quickly, and for you to make an impact and leave a legacy behind every role that you do. I think those are the two things that I would definitely change. I have changed those in the recent past, but it is a learning that I would definitely bring forward with me.
That is great advice. I've definitely experienced that as well. So fantastic advice. Are there, I guess, major success factors that you see, especially when you're talking about those new initiatives within an organization? Are there certain things that just really kind of make that success happen?
Yeah, I think there are five. And if we talk about startups, in a startup or within a large enterprise, there are really five factors that, in my opinion, are fundamental and core to driving success. So it's innovation, cannot emphasize the second one more, the team. Third is the business model, and I gave you that example of how we shifted from selling antennas to selling data services. The
Hmm.
fourth is funding, very important when you're making, inroads into a new business space. And fifth is really a combination of two things. It's execution and timing, being right at the right time in the to market, and hence execution is important. So to be able to execute, to make sure you have the right spot and be the first mover in that market. So I think
Yeah,
those are 5 key success factors, in my opinion.
great. When you look at kind of, one of the things I think that we all run into are these roadblocks that get in the way of making things happen. What have you found are the most effective ways to kind of work around those roadblocks that you just inevitably run into?
I kind of alluded to three of them in the past, and I'll go back to that. Number one, constantly assuming that somebody is already working on doing what you're working on a little better. And we have used a term at Cisco called healthy paranoia. You've got to be constantly paranoid that somebody else is going to get that done better. Number two, it is assume that you are not working on the best solution yet. And whatever you build, listen to your team, listen to your customers, listen to your partners, because they will be a great source of feedback and not be focused on doing it just your way, but absorb their inputs and make sure those get embedded into your products and processes.
Yeah, that's a good idea. How do you, I guess, you'll get a lot of different opinions oftentimes when you're asking for that information. Sometimes you get, very consistent things, but then you'll have these odd things that come up. How do you, I guess, determine which of those pieces of advice to listen to and which ones to kind of back burner, put off to the side?
So it's all about priorities. And we have now actually uh, built what is called the partner advisory model. We're a technology advisory um, workforce forum. So we bring the chief technology architects from our partners, from our customers into this forum and get them to critique and openly critique and make them feel comfortable to give us feedback on the process as well as the products and solutions that we're giving them. So it's both, not just the products and solutions, but also how we are helping them, enabling them, helping their success. And then we take and sift through that, jointly prioritize, and pick the top 3 or 5 things and communicate it back to them that these are the 5 things we will work on. And then we will look at the next set of priorities in a subsequent quarter. So I think being very transparent, being open to inputs, and see engaging them in the process, I think is extremely powerful in this way.
That's great. Okay, so I want to end with one last question, and that is if you could make one prediction about the future, what would it be?
Could I dare to make 3 predictions? And I will go
Yeah,
back to one that I
sure.
have made in a book that I had written in 2016, The Cisco Way. And specifically, I had called out the fact that we would see the Internet of Things explode. And I'd given an example of the Carquinez Bridge, which is in the Bay Area, and how it had all these sensors embedded in it to understand traffic patterns. And look at what's happening today. IoT is all over the place. So the 3 things that I believe are going to be in the future for all of us is number one, the whole retail experience is going to come into your home. And we're already seeing that in boat load. Number two, utilization of assets and sharing will become a way of life. Uber is just one example. And then third is consumption models will change where you will want to consume as you need it, when you need it, and where you need it. COVID showed us that as well. There's last one which I'm very compelled to say, and that is I think driverless vehicles will definitely outpace driven vehicles in the future, especially as we move to autonomous and electric vehicles. So I think there's a lot ahead in the future for us. all exciting stuff. And, it's an opportunity to be engaged in at least one, if not in more of these business changes that we will see.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, as those all come to pass, we'll have to have you back on and we can talk more about those things.
I'll be delighted to come back.
Thank you so much for being here today, Dushyant. I really appreciate it. It was a really enlightening conversation.
A real pleasure to meet with you again and have this conversation. Thank you for having me on the show, Lisa.
Thank you.